Are you tired of spending your time and money chasing strategy after strategy only to discover what worked 10, 5, or even 2 years ago is not working now? Things shift fast in the online space, and if you're not keeping up, you're getting left behind. It's time for something different. Welcome to the Marketing, Media, and Money Podcast, where every single episode will be jam-packed with proven, profitable strategies, behind-the-scenes secrets, and what's working now resources from industry experts and global influencers to help you scale your business, shorten your learning curve, and stand out in a crowded, noisy marketplace. And now, your host, award-winning marketing and media strategist, and international speaker, Patty Farmer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Marketing, Media, and Money Podcast. I'm your host, Patty Farmer, and I'm looking forward to sharing today's industry expert with you. And today we're going to talk about something that I feel is so timely and people get it so wrong. We're going to be talking about how to design and deliver better presentations virtually. You know, I know with the pandemic being here and everybody switching over to virtual, I got to tell you, there's a myth out there that really says that just because you can get on Zoom does not a speaker make, right? So today we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we have an amazing expert with us. So let me tell you a little bit about her. So Whitney D. Walter, known as the PowerPoint Pro, is a certified Microsoft Office specialist and corporate assistant vice president at a Fortune 100 firm. With an MBA from Florida State University and nearly 15 years of experience using PowerPoint, Whitney has set out on a mission to teach professionals the elusive elements of professional presentation design and workflow efficiency so that they can excel in their careers and achieve their dreams. And we all know that a PowerPoint presentation can make or break you in today's world right now, and virtually is the name of the game. So thank you so much for being here with me, Whitney.
Thank you so much for having me, Patty.
So I have to tell you, I didn't know there was somebody that was what their career was. I mean, I think that's super interesting to think that that's what somebody does, but it is so timely. And I have to tell you, recently, I spoke at an event that I have spoken at 9 years in a row. It's a social media conference, and I've spoken at it 9 times. And this year, 3 people afterwards said to me, "So Patty, who did you hire to do your deck for you?" And I was like, "I didn't hire anybody. I did it myself." And they're like, "Really? It's gotten so much better. It's so good." And I was like, wow. So I went back and looked at some of my old ones, and yeah, it really has. But I will say it did, because I took a class on how to do it better. And so I have to tell you, it really makes or breaks an audience. So I think it's really important, which led me to looking for you to have somebody talk to us about how to design those presentations. So let's just kind of jump right in there. How did you get into that? I mean, there's always a story, right? Because you certainly didn't wake up one day and just say, "Oh, you know what? I think I want to have a career in this," right? So how'd you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like most people, I didn't take any actual trainings initially to learn about PowerPoint. It was one of those things where I kind of just taught myself and stumbled through and learned things as I needed to learn them. And in my 9-to-5 job, I started to realize that a lot of people were coming to me and asking for my help with their presentations. They wanted me to revamp them or help them figure out why something wasn't working or showing the way it should be. And I started to become the go-to person for PowerPoint with my colleagues. And I realized that it was a way for me to really differentiate myself from others and help myself to move forward. So I, like you, went out and decided to do some additional training and took it a step further and got certified by Microsoft as a PowerPoint specialist. And I've been using those skills ever since.
I think that is really powerful because, the power of storytelling really works, right? But telling a story and being able to use images at the same time, I think is really, really important. And I remember about 5 years ago, I was at an event. I wasn't speaking at it. I was at this event, and in the big, huge, huge room we were in, they had the main stage screen, and then they had two on the side. And what was interesting then, I get it now, but then what was so interesting is that the main one in the middle was their actual presentation, and that the one on the sides, every few minutes, we would get these waterfalls and these different things on those slides. And I was like, that didn't have anything to do with it. I really loved it and I found it very soothing, but I didn't really understand at the time that it actually had a purpose. And so I started asking, I'm like, why are we doing that? And pretty soon they were like, coming off of all these statistics about how much it can help you and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of led me onto really paying attention to people's decks and what kind of emotions it did and stuff. So can we talk a little bit about like the design first? Because virtually now that is what we're doing. But whether you're in front of 100 people, 1,000 people, or 10, really how much that really matters, and it matters even more now. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point. And whether you realize it or not, when you're a part of a presentation as an audience member, those images are dramatically increasing your engagement in that presentation. And so it sounds like you realized that when you were an audience member watching two different screens present different images, but it kept you engaged. Like you said, it was soothing, it was interesting, and it will also help you to remember what that presentation was about. There have been numerous studies that tell us humans will engage with and remember messages that are related to images at a much higher rate than messages that are text-based alone.
I so believe that. And I think that a lot of times, the way that you do it too, because I know that at this same event that I was recently at, and it was a social media conference. And so there was a lot of high tech stuff. And I remember thinking that this one guy, I don't remember his name, but I will never forget his presentation deck because he was talking about data, right? So his whole thing was about all this data, right? For SEO and all this kind of stuff, analytics. But what he did was he used the Star Trek second generation, which I didn't watch, guy data, right? And he used that guy through his whole thing. And he kind of had him be like this little image of what he said. And he tied it all up at the end with data. And he had D period, he just did it there. And it was just so interesting how he did it and tied it to that theme. So whether you were a Trekkie or not, I just really had to give him kudos for how well he tied it to what his topic was and made it so interesting and engaging.
That's such a great example. I think whoever created the presentation, whether it was him or if he had a team working on it for him, knew that data is one of those topics where you can really quickly and easily lose your audience. It's very dry. There's not a lot of interesting aspects to touch on. And so including interesting images, especially related to pop culture, that's a great way to keep your audience engaged.
I remember back in the day when people would have a lot of text, and that's kind of a no-no now. So before we start on all the things we should do, I always love to talk about what are the things we shouldn't, because it's just as important to know what not to do, right? And stuff. So what would you say that in the times we're in now, right, and moving forward, what are probably 2 or 3 things that you're seeing people still do that maybe we shouldn't? Like, it's time to put that to rest and let's stop doing that.
Well, the number one thing is what you just mentioned, too much text on the screen. I think we've all been using PowerPoint for so long now that sometimes it's a little surprising. You still see presentations that just have a huge block of text on the screen, but that's the number one no-no that I would recommend stepping away from, where you can add in infographics or pictures. GIFs are really popular now. Anything you can do to take some of the text off of your screen is huge. And in this virtual environment, the other thing is, I think a lot of presenters kind of forget about the audience on the other side of the screen, and they're not using the different tools available to them to engage those people that they can't see.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key. I think that really does make a lot of sense. Because I even remember back in the day when we used to take our images and put them in the middle of our of our screen, Last year, I actually invested and hired someone to create branded slides for me. And so when I build my deck now, I already have them pre-branded. So I have like 5 different ones. And that, I really like that. I think it has a better look. I think that's one of the reasons why they asked me if I had somebody else do it and stuff. But it wasn't very expensive, really, honestly, for the value and for how often I really use them. So let's kind of switch over. And before we start really diving into those, this is what you want to do. I always like to say to every one of my guests that when you're thinking about overall now, thinking about PowerPoint or whatever, doing presentations, what's a common myth that you'd like to debunk? Because I think a lot of times people, they have this thing in their head and they just can't get past it. Like, it's so funny how people are still like talking like, man, that was like a long time ago. But once they get that myth in their head, they just can't let go. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to say, let that go. I'm an expert at it. And let me just tell you, you need to let that go. I know the text thing was really one, but just what's a myth that people really do think about when they're giving presentations?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest myth is that creating presentations is hard and it takes a long time. And I think the reason that a lot of people have that idea is because they haven't taken advantage of a lot of the shortcuts you can use in PowerPoint and similar presentation programs that allow you to create really customized templates you can apply to the entire presentation or to specific formatting options. And that really cuts down on the amount of time and stress related to creating a new presentation.
When I was looking at your website, I noticed that you made reference to that you need to stop making your PowerPoint presentations from scratch. And I thought that was super, super interesting because I was thinking about how every time, I think it takes me longer to make my presentation deck than it does to write my speech. And maybe it should, but it absolutely does. And so I'm like, what do you mean you don't have to do it from scratch? Now, I do look at previous ones that I've done, and I have even turned some of my slides into JPEGs and saved them in a master folder and said, oh, which ones can I start with that I use? But what did you mean by that? Like, stop doing that.
Right. Yes. So there are many different ways that you can avoid creating your presentation from scratch and really save yourself a lot of time. It sounds like you're kind of on to one of them, which is creating a personalized template of some sort. There is actually a feature within PowerPoint called Slide Masters, which allows you to create a really detailed template where you can place your branding information, anything that you may want to show in the footer, your headings. You can format all of your text ahead of time before you've even added anything to your presentation. And then you can use that over and over again. There are also other options where if you're writing your presentation in Word, like a lot of people do because they're more comfortable with that format, you can actually import a Word outline into PowerPoint and it will pre-fill your slide headers and your slide content for you. So there's really no reason that you should be creating a PowerPoint completely from scratch.
Wow, that sounds pretty amazing. I would love that because I do create my whole thing in Word first. Is there a way? Is there a way in PowerPoint, like the one thing that PowerPoint doesn't do that I know of, right, is the thing that always gets me is I have branded fonts. I purchase them, I like using them, and I do them and everything. And so I notice that sometimes when I go and speak, they let me bring a flash drive, and so my fonts stay intact. But whenever they say, can you send it to me, and we want to put it in their thing so they can have them all go, it always jacks up my presentation. And so everyone's like, oh, you have to use Google fonts. And I'm like, why can't I use my font? Is there a way to upload a custom font into your PowerPoint so that it will work?
Yes, there is a way to do this. in the file section of PowerPoint, you actually have an option where you can embed your font in your presentation, and that will maintain it no matter where you send it.
I love that. Thank you so much. You just made my day. Okay, that's awesome. Yes. Okay, so let's just start with this simple question first. What do you see as the differences now between presenting virtually and in person? Like, there's some changes we have to make. What are the things we need to be doing to really be effective virtually? So let's start with that, and then we can start breaking them down.
So I think the first thing is getting comfortable with the technology. I think a lot of us were used to presenting in person, and switching over to virtual means that we're using new softwares and programs that we're not familiar with, which can make you even more nervous if you have any sort of anxiety related to public speaking already. So the number one thing you can do there is set up some time to do a dry run with your technology. Find out if there is a way for you to schedule a meeting and run through the entire presentation as you would once you're live. And that will really cut back on the glitches and those awkward silences while you're clicking around on the screen trying to figure out where you should be.
That makes a lot of sense. And, and a lot of times too, when we're doing presentations, I know a lot of times we're pre-recording them and we're using the same virtual software now, right? Everybody's used to using Zoom. I personally have Zoom fatigue, but we're used to using, Zoom. And so I find now that when I do all my pre-recorded stuff, I actually do it on Zoom as well. And because I have 3 monitors, I put people up on my other monitor, so I feel like I'm talking to somebody. But even with that, when I'm presenting, I find that, I travel all over the world speaking, but it is so different when you don't get that whole connectedness of having somebody in front of you, right? And so it's totally different. So I'm always thinking to myself, how do you pull those things? And that's kind of what I really wanted you to speak about, really, is, one, how do you design them better? Like, what are the ways that we can design them better so that they're better virtually, right? So what are some tips and tricks and hacks?
So one of the things that I've been doing since I've been in the virtual environment, like everyone else, is baking in places in my presentation where I'm pausing to engage with the audience. I think when you're in person, you can make eye contact, you can kind of reference people in the room, and it keeps your audience engaged and gives you that personal connection. But when you're on camera, it really lacks in that department. So pausing and allowing people to ask questions or posing a question to your audience is a great way to get that connection back and really keep things going.
Oh, that is a really good one. I really like that one. That's a good one. So let's kind of talk about when you're presenting, right? So what are some different things? Because I know there's a lot of tools, but I know there are some things that we do need to do when we're presenting. The other day, I saw someone give a presentation. And, most times when I see people present on Zoom, right? Here's the little gallery over here, right? And then people have their PowerPoint presentation. But this guy had his PowerPoint presentation, and he was virtual, but it was really big. It was almost like it was on the big screen, like you were at a stadium seeing people, and he was like in front of it. And I was like, wow, that was actually pretty interesting. And I actually contacted him, and he said, oh, it's a new thing in Zoom where you can create your presentations like that now, so that you're really like a speaker, down here, not like a square over here, but you could do it. But he said you have to change how you do your presentations to do that. It was bigger than life, really. And it really made me remember what it was like when we got to speak on stages, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, what's the thoughts we need to have now, right? We need to change not just how we design, but how we're thinking about it when we design, when we're thinking about who it is that is watching our presentation or listening to our presentation, whenever the case may be, and how we show up, like energy level even, right? And how can we put that into our presentation? Are there ways to be able to do that like you can when you're in person?
Yeah, so what you just mentioned sounds like it was probably a virtual background of some sort. And I think that's such a great idea to kind of imitate that live experience. The other thing that I would recommend is really keeping in mind the fact that a virtual audience is probably already not engaged with what you're saying. If we're being honest here, a lot of people have their cameras turned off and they're multitasking, right? I think we've all done that before. So you really have to keep that in mind when you're creating your presentation, and you've got to boost up your energy level. You've got to turn your webcam on. You have to add in those images and maybe even videos to keep your audience entertained, because more than likely they've got one eye on the screen and one eye on something else.
That is so absolutely true. I know for me that if I don't see somebody get with it and I don't think their stuff is interesting, or they have too much text, that's always what'll do it for me. If they're reading off their slides and their slides are boring, then that really does it for me. Personally, the thing that keeps me the most engaged is when people do humor, like when they do funny things, like their pictures are funny. Like I know that for me, I mean, I'm in marketing, and when I talk about things all the time, I ask people like, is this you when you're talking about leveraging the media? And then I have a picture on the slide of people, with their head in their sand and their butts in the air, and everybody always laughs, right? So
right.
Like I try using things that I think will make people laugh and stuff and catch their attention. It's kind of almost like how we use social media to stop the scroll, right? So you're stopping them from being distracted from something else. But, when I think of PowerPoint, though, I think of the days where we focused on things like transitioning our slides and all the cool ways that we could do it and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's so much more than that now, really, when we're doing it. So when we're really designing it and we're doing that outline. So the most important thing you're saying is really thinking about less text, more images. So is that like your number one thing, is really that is what you're supposed to do? But how do you set yourself apart so that people do think that, I mean, obviously you have a call to action, right? We all have somebody, what it is that we want them to do. But what are some of the ways that, I mean, if you're a speaker, you also are saying, I am a speaker and I know how to present well. So you want to set yourself apart as a presenter. Like 85% of the people listening to this podcast are speakers. So as a speaker per se, you also want to present well. So your presentation, your PowerPoint per se, looks really good compared to others where people would say, oh, well, yeah, that was great, but man, yours was really good. You really kept my people engaged. So as a speaker or somebody who wants to use presenting virtually in their business, what are some of the things that you think they should be incorporating?
I think that it's a good idea to invest in some sort of meeting program that will allow you to engage your audience in a way where they're actively participating. And what I mean by that is a meeting software that includes polls you can put up, possibly annotations that your audience members can do on the screen while you're working. Things like this will keep them engaged because the presentation is more about them than it is about you, and they'll also remember that more.
I think that's true. I went to a virtual event and it was going to be all day. Right after we all were like staying at home, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, like I just don't know if I can make myself sit for 6 hours. But they made us get out of our chair and do all kinds of stuff. They were like, you have 20 seconds to find something, within 5 feet of your desk that is an accomplishment, and be prepared to tell us about it when you get back, or, whatever. And so we were out of our seats. It was actually kind of fun, to be totally honest, because you can get kind of bored sitting in a ballroom for hours as well, right? So I do find that people are stepping up their game and stuff, but I do feel like it is a question I get asked a lot, right? My clients and people who aren't as professional as speakers, they haven't been, but the virtual world has given them an opportunity to be in front of more people, and they want to be better and stuff. And so, they ask questions a lot. And so whenever my clients in my audience start asking me questions, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go find an expert on that, right? I can give them my opinion, but really, honestly, I wanted to have an expert. So I don't always ask this, but I really want to know, what haven't I asked you that is something that you really would want to answer in this space? Like, this I think is really important. And I may not have touched on all of the things for what they need to do to design and deliver better presentations virtually. So what else do they need to know? Here's the mic. No, that's what I'm giving you the mic. Like, here is the mic, because I really feel like a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, right? And I find that some of the things virtually is like how people show up and they don't realize, what they're wearing and all the different things that they can do in their facial expressions. They don't realize that, we can see all of those things, right? But we're really talking about presenting, because we can do a whole other one on what you should do when you're attending, right? But I'm sure that there's some other things that we really should keep in mind to make real professional looking PowerPoints, right? So besides less text, more images and how we use them, what are some other things?
That's a great question. So for presentations virtually and in person, I would also recommend really taking the time to go through your entire presentation with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that there is nothing there that could potentially make you lose credibility. So those small things like grammatical errors, spelling errors, if you are doing a presentation on facts and figures, making sure that those are all accurate as well, but also taking a close look at any branding that is a part of your presentation as well. A lot of times that will be the main thing that your audience remembers after the fact. And you may need to adjust it slightly for the virtual environment so that it still makes sense on the screen. So those are all things that you can do to prepare yourself for presenting virtually and really leaving a lasting impression with your audience.
I love that. A lot of times people talk about when you're blogging and when you're writing, how important it is to leave white space, right? And not have such stuff so crowded. When you're thinking about PowerPoint and presentations, do you think it's important to have white backgrounds versus colored backgrounds? I know we all care about our branding, right? So should we use branding color to support it, but we should start with white for that reason? Or do you feel like since we're virtual, we don't need to do it? How important is color and how we use it to our presentations?
Color is very important. And typically I recommend against just using white backgrounds, especially if you're using black text. So it sounds like you're doing even more things right over there, Patty. But you have to be careful with color also, because I've seen a lot of presentations where people do want to be true to their branding and they have a background that is beautiful by itself, but it's really distracting once you put text on top of it. So perhaps you can consider creating a background that's a little more muted, a little less distracting, and that way you can stay on brand, but you can also make sure that your message isn't getting lost.
I think that's important too, since a lot of people use black. I notice a lot of people use red, and black on red or red on black, neither one of those work very well. And I know that even when I did my brand early on, I figured out that I needed another color so I didn't have to use black and white all the time for text color and stuff though. So I think that was very, very important. And you can send a lot of subliminal messages with color too, right? I think that is important. I know that all of my quotes of the day I do, my colors are teal and purple, and I do the teal ones whenever I'm quoting someone else, and I use purple whenever it's an original quote by me. And so I just kind of subliminally teach people to know that if it's purple, it's me, right? And not that other people's quotes aren't great too, but just so that they know. And I've used that in my presentations as well, right? I want people to know that, hey, when I'm teaching you something that is this, but when I'm talking and supporting an idea of somebody else's, and I use my color that way as well. I don't know if anybody else notices it or it just makes me feel good, but whatever, I have found that I think that it does look better. I think the other thing too that I noticed too is when you're creating PowerPoint, I notice that the thing I do all the time is that slideshow where you can see, you need to look and see how it looks to them, because sometimes when you're creating it in PowerPoint, it looks really, really good. And then you get to that slideshow and you run it through and you're like, oh, wow, that doesn't look quite as good as I thought it did. And so I find that for me, I really work with it through the whole thing to make sure, rather than waiting till I'm done, because I think that that is really important, because sometimes it does not look the same, right? It does not look the same. And I think that is important. So I have to tell you, these tips have been really, really great. Some of it you validated for me, which I really appreciate. But I do feel like, it's something I do all the time. It's not necessarily something that my audience does all the time, though. And so I think it is really, really important nowadays for people to switch this up to how they are delivering virtually, and that it does need to be a little bit differently, and that there are tools there within there. I have to tell you, those tips about how you can create your slide and not have to do it from scratch and all these different things, I think are really, really important, which leads me to how generous you are in bringing gifts with you that are really going to help with all of those things. So supporting gifts, I think, is just so beautiful. So you actually have 2 of them, which I really, really love. So why don't you tell us first? We'll put the links below so you don't have to worry about that. But why don't you tell us first a little bit about the 7 easy steps to professional looking PowerPoints? That's your first gift.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to be able to share that with your listeners, both of these. So this first one is really a summary of quite a few of the tips that we've gone over here today that you can use in the virtual environment and when you're working on presentations in person, for in-person presentations. The tips are going to go into more detail about some of the things we've talked about here, but there's also a checklist at the end, which is really quick one-pager that you could potentially print out and keep next to your desk and use as a guideline at the very end of creating your presentation to make sure you've gone through and checked to make sure everything is really clean and polished and ready to go.
That's awesome. And your second gift?
The second one is tips for presenting virtually. So a great summary of what we've been talking about here today. And I'm going into even more detail about how you can prepare for your virtual presentations and really come out looking like a pro at the end.
I love that. And speaking of pro, how can people connect with you? I know they're going to want to, because they're going to want to know more, but how can they connect with you?
Sure. So my website is whitneydwalter.com. I'm also Whitney D. Walter on all social platforms.
How nice is that? That makes a lot of sense, right? So I have to tell you, this is the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. And so we always love to ask our guests kind of my version of social karaoke, #OpenMic, where we like to ask our guests, what is your number one marketing, media, money tip?
My top marketing tip is to simply invest the time to learn PowerPoint or a similar presentation program. Your credibility is directly tied to how you represent your company and yourself with your presentations. And if for whatever reason you can't take the time to learn PowerPoint, delegate to someone who has the time to do it or who has already mastered it. As a professional, it's an invaluable skill to have that can be used for client demonstrations, conversations with investors, and even marketing communications. So it's definitely worth taking the time to invest in the program and yourself.
Perfect. And that is so absolutely true. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Whitney. You were so generous with your information and your gifts too. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, the Exacta Corporation, developer of the Family Organizer Plus platform. And so for more information, you can check them out at exactacorp.com. And to the listeners, thank you so much for joining us on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and review the podcast on your favorite listening platform. So thank you again, everyone. Until next week, have a phenomenal week.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. To shorten your learning curve even more, make sure to grab your free copy of the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine at www.marketingmediamoney.com. I promise your business will thank you.